A cowboy found his mail-order bride crippled and dying by a stream. Then did the unthinkable. The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. On the wide-open plains, the wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying the faint scent of earth and cattle. At the edge of the ranch, a lone cowboy stood with his hands on his hips, his weathered hat shading eyes that had seen too many years of hard work and too many nights of silence. This was his home, a sprawling land of rolling hills, wooden fences, and a small, sturdy cabin that had stood for generations. Life here was simple, yet lonely. For years, the cowboy had risen with the sun and rested only when the work was done. His days were filled with feeding horses, mending fences, and riding long trails to check on cattle. Nights were quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the soft crackling of the fire in his hearth. He had friends in town, neighbors who waved from a distance, but no one shared his meals or sat by his fire with him. The silence of the cabin pressed against him, reminding him that even the vast sky above could not fill the emptiness he felt inside. Loneliness, however, was a companion the cowboy had grown accustomed to. He had long accepted that life on the ranch was a life of solitude. Yet, as the years stretched on, the thought of sharing it with someone became harder to ignore. The idea of a family, a woman who could be a partner in life and in work, occasionally drifted into his mind. The thought was not born out of desperation, but from a quiet longing, a hope that life could offer more than the endless routine of chores and wide-open spaces. It was in this spirit, with both caution and hope, that the cowboy had decided to write letters to a mail-order bride. The concept was unusual to some, even frowned upon by others, but to him, it was a chance to connect with someone who shared his desire for a simpler, honest life. He wanted a companion, someone who could walk beside him in the fields, share stories by the fire, and understand the rhythm of ranch life. And so, carefully and thoughtfully, he had chosen a woman who had answered his ad with sincerity and hope. Months passed as they exchanged letters. Each letter arrived like a small treasure in the mailbox, carrying words filled with dreams, fears, and a longing for connection. She spoke of the world she had left behind, a small town with dusty streets and bustling markets, of struggles and moments of joy. She wrote of her own loneliness, the quiet nights spent in an empty home, and the hope that someday life could offer her a place to belong. With each word, the cowboy felt a growing curiosity and a strange, cautious excitement. The letters revealed her spirit, resilient, kind, and brave. She spoke of wanting a life rooted in honesty and simplicity, a life that mirrored the cowboy's own. He found himself reading and rereading her letters by the fire, imagining her voice, her laugh, and the way she might tilt her head when speaking. In the quiet of the cabin, these letters became more than words on paper. They were a bridge between two strangers who, in their own way, understood each other's loneliness. Finally, after months of careful planning, the day arrived. She would travel to meet him in person. The cowboy had prepared the cabin, cleaned the floors, polished the simple furniture, and even cooked a modest meal, hoping to offer a welcome that was both warm and respectful. He had thought through every detail, from the flowers by the window to the small, handwritten note he would place on the table. His heart, long unused to such anticipation, began to beat faster at the thought of finally seeing her. Early in the morning, he mounted his horse, ready to meet her at the train station. The air was crisp and cool, filled with the scent of dew on the grass. As he rode, he scanned the horizon, imagining her arrival, picturing her stepping off the train with a hopeful smile, her eyes searching for him among the crowd. Each moment stretched, heavy with anticipation. The sun climbed higher, casting shadows on the dirt roads, yet she was nowhere in sight. When he reached the station, he dismounted, running a hand through his hair as he looked around. There were passengers moving about, families reuniting, merchants carrying goods, and children laughing in the sun, but she was not there. His heart sank slightly, though he tried to hold on to hope. Perhaps she was delayed, he thought. Perhaps the journey had been longer than expected. He waited patiently, scanning each arriving carriage, each new face, hoping to see her among the travelers. As the minutes turned into an hour, unease began to creep in. A neighbor who happened to be passing by stopped to ask what he was doing. When he explained, the neighbor's eyes widened, and he mentioned something that made the cowboy's chest tighten. "I saw a young woman heading toward the stream this morning," the neighbor said. She looked tired, seemed like she was having trouble walking. The words struck the cowboy like a sudden gust of wind. His heart skipped, a mixture of fear and urgency flooding through him. She was alone, far from help, and something had gone wrong. Without another word, he mounted his horse and began riding toward the stream, his eyes sharp, scanning the landscape for any sign of her. The wind whipped against his face as he pushed the horse faster, the familiar terrain now taking on an urgent, almost threatening character. The stream was nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by trees and wildflowers, the water sparkling under the afternoon sun. As he approached, he noticed movement near the edge, something that made his stomach drop. There, lying against the bank, partially in the shallow water, was a figure. His heart pounded as he spurred the horse forward, realizing that the figure was a woman, her clothes wet and torn, her body weak and trembling. He dismounted quickly, rushing to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a mixture of concern and relief. She stirred slightly, her eyes barely opening, revealing a gaze filled with pain and fear. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped her lips, too faint for him to catch. Her legs appeared injured, twisted awkwardly beneath her, and her hands clutched at the earth as if holding on for dear life. The cowboy's mind raced. He had known she might face challenges traveling to meet him, but he had never imagined this. The sight of her, so fragile, so vulnerable, stirred something deep within him. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her, carefully lifting her into his arms. Her weight was light, but her trembling sent a shiver through him. He spoke gently, trying to offer reassurance. "I've got you, you're safe now, I'll get you out of here." He placed her on the horse, supporting her as best as he could. The ride back to the ranch was tense, every bump and turn of the trail making her shiver in his arms. The cowboy focused on keeping the horse steady, his mind a whirlwind of worry and determination. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, and the valley seemed to grow colder with each passing moment. He whispered softly to her, telling her that help was near, that she was not alone anymore. As they neared the ranch, the cowboy's heart tightened with a mixture of relief and dread. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now felt like a sanctuary. He could see the familiar walls and the small yard where the horses grazed, but his mind could not rest. She was injured, fragile, and her survival depended on how quickly he could act. He carried her into the cabin, laying her gently on the bed he had prepared for her. Every movement was careful, every step measured, as if the slightest mistake could worsen her condition. He tore strips of cloth to make bandages, fetched water, and tried to calm her trembling with soothing words. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting his gaze with a mixture of fear, gratitude, and exhaustion. The evening grew darker, the quiet of the ranch pressing around them. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and the distant hills melted into shadow. Inside, the cowboy tended to her as best he could, his hands steady despite the racing of his heart. In that moment, the distance between them, strangers who had only known each other through letters, disappeared. All that mattered was survival, compassion, and the fragile thread of trust forming between them. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The cowboy watched her sleep fitfully, her breath shallow but steady. He felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. She had survived the journey, survived the fall, but the uncertainty of her condition lingered. He did not sleep that night, sitting by her side, speaking softly, reassuring her even when she could not respond. As the first light of dawn crept through the cabin window, he knew the day ahead would be filled with challenges. But there was also hope, a fragile, flickering hope that life could offer something more than loneliness. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt the stirrings of a connection, a bond that had begun not with words or promises, but with the raw, unspoken understanding that had carried her safely into his arms. And though he did not yet know the full story of what had brought her to the stream, he knew one thing with certainty. He would do whatever it took to keep her alive. Whatever the cost, whatever the risks, he would not let her slip away. The ranch, once silent and empty, now held the presence of someone who had traveled far, suffered much, and carried hope like a fragile ember in her chest. And in that quiet, tension-filled dawn, the cowboy realized that life had changed forever, because the woman he had waited for, dreamed of, and hoped for had arrived, though not as he had imagined. The story was only beginning, and the questions of what had happened on the journey and what the future might hold hung in the air like the morning mist over the stream. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and the wild grasses that stretched across the valley. The sun had risen higher now, spilling golden light over the hills and casting long shadows across the ranch. Inside the cabin, the cowboy sat near the bed, watching her sleep, her face pale but peaceful for the moment. He could not help but notice the way her body trembled slightly with each shallow breath, the faint marks on her arms and legs that hinted at a rough journey. The sight filled him with a quiet, gnawing worry. He had seen many things in his life: storms that tore through fences, wild animals that threatened the herd, injuries that required quick thinking. But nothing had prepared him for the fragile weight of another human being, someone so close to death yet clinging to life with a stubborn will. He felt a sense of responsibility heavier than any burden he had ever carried. This was not just about survival. It was about trust, hope, and the delicate thread connecting them now. He remembered the neighbor's words from the previous day, how she had been seen heading toward the stream, injured and struggling. Questions raced through his mind. What had happened on the trail? Had she fallen, tripped, or been attacked by some unseen hazard? He did not know, and there was little time to speculate. He needed to focus on her, on what could be done to stabilize her condition before she weakened further. The cowboy carefully assessed her injuries. Her legs were bruised and swollen, suggesting possible fractures or sprains, and she had several scrapes along her arms where the branches of trees must have scratched her as she struggled along the trail. Her clothes were soaked and dirty, the result of falling into the shallow stream. He knew exposure could make things worse quickly. The cool morning air might help fight swelling, but without proper care, infection or shock could set in. He moved with calm urgency, cleaning the scrapes gently with the warm water he had brought from the kitchen. Every movement was deliberate, careful not to cause her pain or worsen her injuries. He tore clean strips of cloth from an old sheet, soaking them to use as makeshift bandages, wrapping them securely around her swollen limbs. He spoke softly all the while, hoping his voice would offer reassurance even when she could not respond. When she stirred, her eyes fluttering open, he could see a mixture of pain, confusion, and fear in her gaze. "You're safe now," he whispered, placing a steady hand over hers. "I've got you. We're going to get through this." She tried to speak but could barely form words, her lips trembling with effort. He listened carefully, catching fragments, a whisper of fear, a faint mention of a fall. Her voice was weak, but it carried a sense of relief when she realized she was no longer alone. The cowboy knew that time was critical. Even minor injuries could worsen quickly in someone already exhausted and weak. He decided to keep her in the cabin for the day, away from the cold and exposure, while he worked on stabilizing her condition. He prepared a warm corner with blankets and pillows, supporting her so she could rest without putting pressure on her injured limbs. Every detail mattered. A soft pillow under her head, a folded blanket beneath her knees, another draped across her shoulders to keep her warm. Hours passed in careful tending. The cowboy fetched water, prepared light food, and cleaned the shallow wounds to prevent infection. She did not eat much, but he encouraged her gently, knowing nourishment was important for her recovery. Her eyes followed him as he moved around the room, a fragile trust forming between them. Though she was weak, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, a courage that had carried her across miles of hardship to reach this place. Despite his focus on her care, the cowboy could not help but think about the stream where he had found her. The memory replayed vividly, the sight of her body trembling against the water, the desperate strength she had shown even in pain. He had lifted her into his arms without hesitation, driven by instinct and a sense of duty. Now, seeing her safe but vulnerable, he realized how close she had been to death, how fragile life could be in these wild, isolated lands. By midday, he had managed to clean the deeper scrapes and stabilize her legs with gentle wraps. He sat by her side, speaking softly, asking her about her journey, learning about the small town she had left behind, and the hopes she had carried with her. Her voice was still faint, but each word revealed resilience and determination. She had traveled alone, across long, rough paths, facing unknown dangers, all in search of a new life. Her courage impressed him, deepening the respect and care he felt. He noticed her eyes lingering on the window, watching the sunlight dance across the grass. "You like it here?" he asked gently. She nodded slightly, a faint smile breaking through her fatigue. "It's peaceful," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the quiet of the cabin. The cowboy smiled softly, realizing that despite the harshness of the journey and the pain she had endured, she had not lost hope. The day wore on, and the cowboy remained vigilant. He checked the bandages, adjusted her blankets, and kept the fire warm. Every movement was careful, measured, as if he were handling something precious and delicate. He understood that her survival depended on both his skill and his patience. He had faced many challenges before, but this was different. This was not about cattle, fences, or storms. This was about saving a life, about protecting someone who had entrusted her hope to him. As afternoon turned into evening, the cabin was filled with a quiet tension, a mixture of relief and worry. The cowboy knew that even though she was resting, the danger was not entirely past. Complications could arise, injuries could worsen, and he could not leave her alone. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily on him, but it was accompanied by something unexpected, a growing bond, a sense of connection that went beyond duty. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sound of the stream where she had fallen. The cowboy's mind returned to that moment again and again, thinking about the miles she had traveled, the obstacles she had faced, and the sheer determination that had brought her to his doorstep. He realized that every hardship she had endured had built a strength that matched his own, a quiet, steadfast courage that now lay before him, fragile yet unbroken. As darkness fell, he prepared a simple supper, encouraging her to eat a little to keep her strength up. She ate slowly, each bite a small victory against exhaustion. He offered water and held her hand while she drank, the gesture simple but meaningful, a reassurance that she was not alone, that she could rely on him. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent exchange he sensed gratitude, fear, and a growing trust. Night deepened, and the cabin grew quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and her gentle breathing. The cowboy sat nearby, keeping watch, his thoughts a mixture of concern and determination. He knew the next hours would be crucial. Every decision, every movement mattered. Her life hung in the balance, and he could not afford to falter. At some point, she murmured in her sleep, a faint word he could not catch, but it carried the weight of fear and hope intertwined. The cowboy tightened the blanket around her shoulders and whispered softly, "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." His voice, calm yet firm, seemed to reach her even in her weakened state. He felt a quiet relief that she was still alive, still fighting, still clinging to the hope that had brought her here. He thought about what had brought her to this point, her courage, her faith in a new life, and her willingness to travel into the unknown. He realized that the journey was far from over. The injuries she carried, the challenges ahead, and the unknown consequences of the fall would test them both. Yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a bond forming, delicate but real, between two people brought together by fate and circumstance. Hours later, the cowboy finally allowed himself a brief moment of rest, sitting in the chair near the bed, keeping his eyes on her as she slept. Outside, the wind continued to whisper through the grasses, the ranch bathed in moonlight. Inside, the cabin held the quiet energy of hope, fear, and a fragile connection that had formed in the face of danger. He knew that the coming day would be filled with questions, decisions, and challenges, but for now, he allowed himself to simply watch over her. Her survival had become his responsibility, and he was determined to see her through this trial. He had found her at the edge of death, and he would not let her go without a fight. As the night deepened, the cowboy whispered one last promise before closing his eyes. "We'll get through this. You're not alone anymore." And in that quiet moment, the cabin, once a place of solitude, became a sanctuary, a place of hope, resilience, and the beginning of an unexpected bond that neither of them could yet fully understand. The dawn broke slowly over the ranch, soft light spilling across the rolling fields, brushing the tops of the horses grazing in the quiet pastures. Inside the cabin, the cowboy had barely slept. He sat in the chair near the bed, watching her as she shifted restlessly under the blankets. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven, and he could see the strain in her eyes as she tried to sit up. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, urging her to lie back. "Take it easy," he said softly. "You've been through a lot, rest a little more." She nodded weakly, her lips trembling as she attempted a faint smile. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Her voice was hoarse, nearly lost in the quiet of the room. The cowboy shook his head firmly. "No trouble," he replied. "You didn't ask for this, you're hurt, that's all that matters, we'll get through it together." He stood and moved about the cabin with calm efficiency, gathering clean cloth, warm water, and herbs he had learned to use over years of ranch life. Though he had treated injuries before, this was different. These injuries were severe, the result of a fall into the stream, and without proper care she could slip into a dangerous state. He checked her pulse, her breathing, and the swelling on her legs. The more he examined, the more he realized that her condition was worse than he had first thought. It was a moment of truth. The nearest doctor was miles away, and with the trail still difficult from the recent storm, help would not arrive in time. He could call for a neighbor, but they might not have the experience or the tools necessary to treat her properly. He faced a difficult decision: either wait and hope she survived, or take matters into his own hands and perform a more immediate, risky care plan himself. The cowboy's mind raced. He had grown up learning to survive in these lands, to trust his instincts, and to act decisively when life demanded it. He had tended to injured animals countless times, patched fences in dangerous conditions, and braved storms to protect his herd. But this was a human life, a fragile beating life, and the responsibility weighed heavily on him. His heart told him one thing: he could not stand by and let her fade away. With steady hands, he began preparing for the care she needed. He cleaned her wounds again, this time with boiling water carefully cooled to a safe temperature, removing the last traces of dirt and debris. He wrapped the more serious injuries with clean cloth, tying them snugly to provide support without cutting off circulation. Every movement was precise, every touch measured. He whispered reassurances to her, feeling the subtle shift in her breathing as she slowly relaxed under his care. As he worked, he spoke softly, trying to distract her from the pain. "You're stronger than you realize," he said gently. "You've already made it this far, and I'll make sure you make it through the rest." She gave a faint nod, her eyes filled with trust, fear, and something else he could not yet name, perhaps relief. The cowboy understood then that survival was not just about physical care, but also about calming the spirit, giving hope when everything seemed hopeless. Hours passed, and the cowboy realized that her legs were too weak to support her weight. He improvised a sling from strong rope and soft cloth, creating a makeshift support that could stabilize her as she rested. He helped her onto a mattress on the floor, propping her upper body with pillows. Every action was deliberate, every movement guided by experience and intuition. She winced occasionally, but he spoke gently, instructing her to breathe through the discomfort, to trust him. The day stretched on, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Outside, the ranch was quiet, the wind rustling through the tall grasses. Inside, the cabin was filled with a tense calm. The cowboy knew that each passing hour was critical. She was alive but fragile. He kept her warm with blankets and a fire in the hearth, and he made sure she stayed hydrated, offering water in small sips to avoid overwhelming her system. He spoke softly about the land, the horses, and the ranch life, telling stories of the people who had lived here before him, stories meant to distract her from the pain and fear. By late afternoon, it was clear that she needed more than care. She needed support to survive the next stage. The cowboy considered taking her to the nearest town, but the journey was dangerous. The trail was rough, and her condition was too unstable for travel. Every step could worsen her injuries or cause a shock. He realized then that if she were to survive, he would have to make a bold choice. He would have to act in a way that no one else might consider. He spent the evening preparing. He reinforced the bed, added extra blankets for warmth, and fashioned a system of supports so she could be moved safely if necessary. He arranged water, herbs, and clean cloths within reach. He spoke to her quietly, explaining what he was doing and why. Though she was weak, she listened, her trust growing with each word. She seemed to understand that his actions were guided not just by duty, but by care. As night fell, the cowboy realized that the danger was not over. Infection, shock, or internal injuries could still threaten her life. He kept vigil, watching her chest rise and fall, listening for signs of distress, ready to intervene at any moment. He thought of the long hours he had spent alone, the loneliness that had defined his life, and he recognized a strange, unexpected bond forming with this woman who had come so far and suffered so much. The quiet of the night was punctuated by small noises: the creak of the cabin, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rustle of leaves outside. Each sound reminded him of the isolation, the fragility of life in these lands. He knew that help would not come quickly and that he alone would have to guide her through the night. The responsibility was immense, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of purpose. This was more than survival. It was connection, trust, and the raw human instinct to protect someone in need. Then came a moment of truth. She shifted, attempting to sit up, and pain flashed across her face. The cowboy sprang into action, gently pushing her back, murmuring reassurances. "No," he said firmly but gently. "Not yet. Let's wait. We'll do this together." He helped her adjust to a more comfortable position, propping her with pillows and guiding her with care. Every movement was slow, precise, and deliberate, because one wrong motion could undo all their work. Hours stretched into the night, and he remained vigilant. He knew that the morning would bring new challenges, assessing her injuries further, planning for recovery, and ensuring she could regain strength. But for now, the focus was on keeping her alive, maintaining warmth, hydration, and hope. He spoke softly, telling stories of the ranch, the animals, and the small joys of life in these lands, hoping to distract her from pain and fear. At one point, she whispered something barely audible. "Thank you for not letting me die." Her words, weak and trembling, struck him deeply. He shook his head, placing a steady hand on hers. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "You're not going to die. I'll see to it." In that quiet exchange, a bond was cemented, built not on romance but on trust, courage, and the shared struggle for survival. The night deepened and the fire burned low. The cowboy watched over her, checking bandages, adjusting blankets, and ensuring the room stayed warm. Every so often she stirred, but he spoke calmly, guiding her back to rest. He realized that this was not just a test of skill or courage, but of heart. His ability to stay steady, calm, and determined would determine whether she survived. By the end of the night, exhaustion tugged at him, but he did not allow himself to sleep fully. He remained alert, every ear attuned to her breathing, every eye watching for signs of trouble. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet there was also a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had chosen to act, to care, and to trust in his own abilities when no one else could. As the first light of dawn touched the hills once more, he looked down at her sleeping form. The journey to this point had been harrowing, filled with danger and uncertainty. Yet she was alive. He had made the unthinkable choice to act boldly without outside help, to put everything on the line for her survival. And in doing so, he had discovered something unexpected. A connection deeper than he had imagined, a bond forged not in comfort, but in courage, trust, and the raw, unrelenting force of human will. The story of that night, of the choices made in the quiet cabin while the world outside slept, was only the beginning. For both of them, life had changed forever. The cowboy had risked everything to save her, and in doing so, had discovered the depth of his own heart and the fragile, extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. The first light of dawn spread slowly across the ranch, spilling soft, golden hues over the wide fields and the small, sturdy cabin. Outside, the horses stirred in their pens, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses. Inside, the cowboy sat by her side, watching her sleep. Her breathing was steady, the shallow tremors of the night now calmed by warmth and care. Though her body remained fragile, there was a subtle strength in the way she rested, as if the ordeal had begun to teach her endurance and trust. The night had been long, tense, and exhausting for both of them. The cowboy had barely slept, keeping watch over her, tending to bandages, adjusting blankets, and speaking softly to soothe fear and pain. Now, as the new day arrived, he felt a small wave of relief. She had survived the most critical moments. Her life, once hanging by a delicate thread, now had a chance to recover. He gently touched her hand. "Morning," he whispered. She stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes, and for the first time in hours she smiled, weak but genuine. "Morning," she replied softly, her voice still hoarse but filled with a faint warmth. You stayed up all night," the cowboy nodded. "I couldn't leave you." "Not after everything." There was a quiet honesty in his tone, a mix of relief, care, and something deeper, though neither of them spoke the word aloud. She had survived, and the bond between them had grown stronger through shared struggle, through trust and care that transcended words. The first task of the day was to assess her condition. The cowboy gently helped her sit upright, supporting her as she shifted carefully. He examined her legs again, noting the swelling had slightly reduced, and the bruises, though painful, were not worsening. He made a mental note of how he could continue her recovery, gradually, carefully, ensuring she regained strength without overexertion. Each small movement was a victory, a sign that the worst had passed and that patience and persistence could bring hope. Breakfast was simple, a warm porridge and a cup of tea. She ate slowly, every bite a triumph, and he encouraged her with soft words. "Good," he said quietly, watching her. "You're doing fine, just a little at a time." She nodded, grateful for the gentle guidance, realizing that the cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a safe space where she could rest and heal. As the morning progressed, they spoke quietly of small, everyday things: ranch life, the horses, the fields, and the routines that governed the cowboy's day. She listened intently, fascinated by the rhythm and simplicity of this life. Though the journey had been perilous and her body remained weak, she began to feel a sense of belonging, a fragile hope that she might find a place here, not just to recover but to begin anew. The cowboy, too, felt the shift within himself. His solitary existence, defined by work and routine, had now taken on a new meaning. He realized that caring for her had awakened a sense of connection he had long thought dormant. He had acted out of instinct and courage, but now he understood that his life had changed in ways he had never anticipated. The quiet cabin, the wide-open fields, and even the harsh, unyielding land had become a backdrop for something far more human: trust, compassion, and the potential for love. In the afternoon, he helped her move to a softer chair near the window. She gazed out at the rolling hills and the distant stream, her eyes tracing the path she had traveled days ago. "I never imagined it would be so beautiful here," she whispered. The cowboy smiled quietly. "It has its challenges," he replied, "but there's a kind of peace you don't find everywhere. You'll see that as you get stronger." He stayed close, guiding her movements, helping her adjust to the new positions that allowed her to rest without straining her legs. Each small task, though simple, was monumental for her recovery. She leaned on his strength, trusting him fully, and in return he felt a profound responsibility to protect her, nurture her, and ensure she could recover fully. Hours passed, and they shared quiet moments of conversation. She told him stories of her childhood, the small town she had left behind, and her dreams for a life of purpose and meaning. He listened attentively, realizing that the woman before him was resilient, brave, and full of quiet determination. Though her body was injured, her spirit remained strong, a reminder that survival was not only physical but also emotional. The cowboy prepared a small plan for her recovery over the coming days. He would help her gradually regain mobility, ensure she had nutritious food, and tend to her injuries with care. He knew the road ahead would be long and there might be setbacks, but he was determined to stay by her side through it all. She, in turn, expressed gratitude and trust, her eyes reflecting relief and a growing sense of connection. As evening approached, the cowboy took a moment to step outside. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and the sun painted the sky in soft orange and pink hues. He watched the landscape, reflecting on how life had shifted in the past 48 hours. He had found her at the brink of death, made the unthinkable choice to act alone, and now she was alive, fragile but hopeful. The experience had changed him, awakening a depth of care and resilience he had not anticipated. When he returned inside, she was sitting near the window, watching the sun sink behind the hills. He approached quietly, offering a warm blanket and a cup of tea. "Here," he said softly. "You'll feel better." She accepted it with a faint smile, and they sat together in a companionable silence, the bond between them growing stronger with each shared moment. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, she whispered, I don't know how to thank you." I thought I might not make it." The cowboy shook his head gently. "No thanks are needed," he replied. "You fought, you survived, that's what matters. I just helped you along the way." Her eyes glistened, reflecting gratitude, relief, and something else, a recognition of the courage and care that had saved her life. Over the following days, the cowboy continued to help her recover. He moved carefully around the cabin, tending to her wounds, preparing meals, and encouraging her to rest and regain strength. She began to take small steps with support, and each movement was celebrated as a victory. Slowly, the fear and pain that had dominated her journey began to recede, replaced by hope and trust. During this time, their bond deepened. Words were no longer necessary to communicate care. Simple gestures, a steadying hand, a warm blanket, a shared glance, became powerful expressions of trust and connection. The cowboy learned to understand her needs instinctively, and she learned to rely on him with growing confidence. The cabin, once a place of solitude, had become a sanctuary where two lives intertwined in ways neither had expected. One afternoon she asked about the stream where she had fallen. The cowboy described the path, the way the rocks were slick after the rain, and the moment he had found her. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "I didn't think anyone would come in time." He placed a reassuring hand on hers. "I'll always be here," he said, "no matter what." Her eyes glistened with tears, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel the full depth of relief and trust that had grown between them. Weeks passed and her strength slowly returned. She could walk short distances with support, and her spirit seemed lighter with each passing day. The ranch, once empty and silent, now held a quiet energy of life and hope. The cowboy continued his work, tending to the land and animals, but his perspective had shifted. He no longer saw the ranch as a place of solitary routine. It was a place of connection, care, and new beginnings. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and pink, she stood on the porch looking out over the fields. The cowboy joined her, and together they watched the horizon. "It's peaceful here," she said softly. He nodded. "It is. And you're part of it now." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and warms the heart. In that moment, the trials, the fear, and the pain of the journey seemed distant, replaced by the quiet strength of survival and the beginnings of a bond that neither of them had expected. The story of the cowboy and his mail-order bride was not just one of survival, but of courage, trust, and the power of human connection. Through danger and uncertainty, through fear and pain, they had found each other. The cowboy had made the unthinkable choice to act alone, guided by instinct, care, and courage. She had endured, survived, and found hope in a place she had never imagined. As night fell, the cabin glowed softly with firelight. They sat together, sharing quiet conversation and small laughter, the bond between them stronger than ever. Life on the ranch would not always be easy, but they had faced the greatest challenge together and emerged with trust, resilience, and hope. The cowboy, once alone in the vast land, had found a companion. The woman, once on the brink of death, had found safety, care, and a new beginning. The future stretched before them, uncertain yet full of promise. They had survived the impossible, built a connection forged in struggle and courage, and discovered the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Together, they were ready to face whatever life might bring, knowing that through trust, care, and resilience, they could overcome anything. And in that quiet, firelit cabin, two lives, once isolated and fragile, began a journey not just of survival, but of hope, connection, and the promise of something extraordinary yet to come.